4 years ago, in the middle of 9th edition, I quit 40k and started learning games design so that I could one day rebuild 40k from the ground up. When 10th edition dropped and it was everything we feared, I went all in. I rewrote the whole game and we have been playtesting and iterating on that game for 3 years. In these videos, I'm going to show you how 4 years of obsession forged the best version of 40k ever. I'm going to show you the systems we rebuilt from research about games design, and I'm going to show you how you can bring your play group a massively improved tabletop experience. Alright, the first thing to talk about is the turn structure. I go, you go versus alternating activations. For anyone who doesn't know, I go, you go is where your whole army goes and then the other guy's whole army goes all at once. In I go, you go, you have more agency to affect the board with your turn. You come up with a goal for the turn before you do anything and just execute on that goal one step at a time. This is like in normal 40k, this is like in Hearthstone and XCOM. You know, you get given a situation and you have a lot that you can do all at once, and then you build a plan and you execute on that plan all the way down your army. This often leads to less dynamic gameplay, but it does lead to faster games where you can just do everything at once, which is a surprisingly big benefit, as fun is basically a measure of excitement per minute. Faster games tend to be more fun. Any other system will need a serious resume of benefits to beat I go, you go, because being quicker is about the most powerful trait any game system can have. In alternating activations, on the other hand, you can't affect the board as much with your turn before your opponent will change the board state. This means you cannot make a strategy that will not immediately collapse. Therefore, you only analyze the most tactically optimal unit to move and attack with, and just do that. Then you'll have to wait to see what your opponent does. Because as soon as they do something, the most optimal unit for you to move and attack with next will change. This is why alternating activations is known as the more tactical system. Your strategy is relevant. It's not like alternating activations doesn't have any strategy, but it takes a backseat to the turn-by-turn interactions. Alternating activations is a lot more engaging because without needing to watch your opponent execute on 2,000 points worth of strategy over a 40-minute period, you get to affect the board every few minutes. This keeps both players, or all players if you're playing multiplayer, interested in the dynamics of the game as it unfolds. Everyone that has played games has experienced the moment where the strategies of each player in the game is solved. And you kind of notice that a winner is obvious as long as no mistakes are made, even though the game isn't technically over. You both look at the board and you notice that there's no more decisions to be made. There's actually a game theory term for this. It's called Nash equilibrium. Monopoly is the example here as one of the worst offenders of dragging out a game way beyond the point where a winner is almost certain. You never want the game to drag much longer than the winner is discovered. No one likes administering a board game that has an obvious winner. The tension is gone. Alternating activations makes it so that that effect, the game's over moment happens a lot later into the total span of the game. You want the winner to be a mystery for as long as possible, and then ideally, when everyone can see who is going to win, the game should just end. If you're anything like me, when you notice how much you can affect the board state with one turn, and the number of different things that you can do in a turn, and the number of different choices that you can make in all different sequences, the number of different strategies rapidly approaches infinity. This is super jarring, it's painful, it's exhausting. The best strategy isn't to solve each turn in an engaging and dynamic way. Because of the game's complexities in I go, you go, like right at the start of the movement phase, when you look at the board and you notice all the different sequences that you can take and all the different units that every different unit can target, it's impossible to solve that on the fly. So the best strategy becomes show up with a strategy and then just apply it to your opponent, no matter what your opponent's strategy is, no matter what your opponent does, no matter what they bring, no matter what their list is, no matter what their faction is. You come up with a strategy that you're going to play out no matter what your opponent does. Personally, my preference is when a game asks me to make meaningful choices while I'm actually playing them. However, alternating activations isn't all sunshine and sixes. Many naive rules writers have ventured down this road only to be caught unawares by its crippling flaw. Most designers dare not face this dragon at all and simply don't use alternating activations. The problem is, if you do not keep an eye on small units on the way through building the game, you will run into a situation where someone can have a pile of tiny pointless units that they can use to throw the turn back to their opponent so that they have to take all of their meaningful turns before you have to make any of your meaningful turns. Does that make sense? To fix this, we kept a close eye on this problem for the last 3 years, and it turns out, if you're very careful, there is a neat reward in tackling this challenge. The idea of tempo appears. We made sure that most units cluster around 100 points, so that any given turn is usually around the same size. But for very small units, like a tiny transport or a single guardsman squad, we just force you to take a second turn. It doesn't feel like a downside at all if you're not trying to abuse cheap unit spam, because activating something and then activating a second thing feels like cheating. It's 2 turns in a row. There are some units in the game that are cheap enough to be considered too small, but there's design space in allowing that rule to break sometimes. So a hospitaller or an apothecary doesn't just serve to heal your units, they also provide a tempo benefit, forcing your opponent to either expose a unit or at least give you a little bit more information before you make an impactful choice. On the other side of that coin, you have big units, which will have more damage. When leaders attach to small units, they become big units and have more damage per turn, just due to the double unit size, but they do cost you in the total number of turns you have. So, if you don't allow small units to be spammed, both big units and small units have their strength in either raw power or tempo. Okay, so if my shade throwing didn't give it away, I prefer alternating activations. As long as we're careful to not have any effects that take too much time to resolve, we could make a much more tactically deep and engaging experience while still being relatively quick compared to I Go, You Go. I actually tried this in 9th edition. I wrote a document which took all of 9th edition and modified the core rules, zip tying the players' phases together, which preserved all of the faction and unit rules. But of course, the issue with that is that we created a system which preserved all of the awful 9th edition faction rules. After realizing that 40k couldn't be fixed by simply forcing alternating activations into it, instead of getting started straight away, I wanted to wait for 10th edition to see if it was a step in the right direction, to see if they changed their tone at all. During this time, between towards the latter half of 9th edition, I studied and read and watched and absorbed everything I could about games design. I wasn't going to invest any work into the project to fix 40k if Games Workshop could take even one step in the right direction. But then 10th edition came out and it was everything we feared. It was a continuation of the trend started by the move from 7th to 8th to 9th and now 10th. And with that, I was prepared and I was all in. We needed to demolish the whole structure of 40k, every core rule, and start from scratch and attempt some real games design with our own design goals, of which there are 3. I learned a lot about fantasy and player expectations, and that hits so close to home with me as a Grey Knight player, as one of my main issues with 40k is its inability to simply deliver on a fantasy. Whether it's at the faction level or the unit level, 40k consistently misses the mark on just the very simple concept of fantasy delivery. That brings us to the first of our 3 pillars, which we refer to when writing every single rule in the game: guaranteed faction fantasy. The obvious next step is to maximize that fantasy on the tabletop itself, right in the dynamics. You should be able to tell what faction you're up against, even if you switched out all the models with chess pawns, just from the way that the units move around the table, by the way the enemy units interact and don't interact, which leads us to the second pillar: maximize faction fantasy. The third and most important pillar is a response to the fact that even today, Games Workshop games are heavily bloated with advanced language and long paragraphs explaining what might actually be an extremely simple rule dynamically. So, simplified core gameplay loop. This design goal isn't just about the core rules, it's for every rule, for every faction and unit as well. At first, we wanted to chase maximized fantasies until the cows come home. We wrote all kinds of systems for each faction we had at the time, with self-referencing rules and positive feedback loops. We really just made everything OP and cranked everything up. There was a lot of arithmetic. While this would work in a video game where the computer could process all the extra game actions, it doesn't work in a tabletop game. So, simplified core gameplay loop. Having this clearly defined design process helped us learn and move on to better design. Every time we simplified something, the game felt better. This is super important. Listen. The trick in simplifying the game's design is in analyzing the absolute minimum necessary complexity required to connect the player to the fantasy. If you do this, unlike another game I can think of, the fantasy doesn't get diluted, it gets concentrated into a 99.1 pure experience. So, having established our design goals, the next problem to tackle is redesigning the core rules through our new designer lens. If you want to see the first video of that, it's out. See you there. Subscribe while you're down there. If you're keen to see what is the best version of Tabletop 40k ever, the first link in the description is the link to the Discord where we have all the rules, we have battle reports, we talk games design, we talk feedback, analyze rules. For the next set of core rules to talk about, we're going to talk about movement, because they can use... movement needs a lot of help. So yeah, see you there.